please.
During the 60s, we saw segregation. We felt the stain of segregation and racial discrimination. We had to change it. People lived in fear that if they desegregated their lunch counters or their restaurants or their theaters, they would lose business. But it became a moral issue. When young blacks and young whites came together and were saying something like, no more segregation, no more segregation, no more racial discrimination. When people were willing to study the way of peace, the way of love, study the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, and they said in effect, we will not go back, we will not be turned around, we will go forward. It became a moral issue. We were saying we're one people, we're one family, we all live in the same house, the American house, the world house. And as Martin Luther King Jr. said it over and over again, that we were deeply influenced by Dr. King and a young man named James Lawson, that we had a moral obligation to say something, to do something, to speak up and speak out. We may get arrested, we may be thrown in jail, we may be beaten, left bloody, or left for dead, but we couldn't stop. And it became a way of life for many young people. The first time I got arrested, demonstrating and speaking up and speaking out against segregation and racial discrimination, I felt free. I felt liberated. I felt like I had crossed over. And it made me a stronger and better person. At one time in Washington, D.C., a few years ago, black people and white people can be seated together on a bus, leaving the nation's capital to travel through the South. We changed that. But we were beaten along the way. We were arrested. We were jailed. But we kept the faith. We kept our eyes on the prize. And we were saying, in effect, there would be no turning back. We all can study. We all can be trained to find our way or get in the way. And sometimes I feel there's a force that comes through us saying, you have to stand up. You have to speak up. You have to speak out. And when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to do something. And the teaching of individuals like Jim Lawson, or the words that you read of Gandhi, of the speeches of Dr. King and others that come along, they lift us, they move us, and they tell us over and over again, if another person can do just that, if another generation can get in the way, or get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble, I too can do something. I too can get in trouble for the greater good. I met Reverend Lawson, this smart, gifted man, in about 1958 or 59. He was in Nashville representing not just the Fellowship of Reconciliation, but representing the religious community. Jim was born and grew up in Ohio, came south, almost like a missionary, almost like a nonviolent teacher, a warrior to spread the good news. He was speaking at a little church in Nashville, and he announced during his speech there would be nonviolent workshops that he would be conducting. And I attended one of those workshops. It changed my life forever, set me on a path committed to the way of peace, to the way of love, and I have not looked back since. In those workshops that Jim Lawson conducted, we studied the way of peace, the way of love. We studied the teaching of Gandhi. We studied what Martin Luther King Jr. was all about. We studied the whole idea of passive resistance. We studied the way to love. That if someone beats you, or spit on you, or pour hot water or hot coffee on you, you look straight ahead and never ever dreaming of hitting that person back or being violent toward that person. And we accepted it. Most of us accepted it as a way of life, as a way of living. Made us much better human beings. We had what we call role playing, or what some people would call social drama. Someone pretending that they were beating you or hitting you. And there were young people that even didn't smoke, but they would put a cigarette or something and smoke, and then blow smoke in the faces or in the eyes of some of the people, preparing them for whatever could happen or might happen. It was a way we have been trained that you absorb the hitting, the beating, but you don't come out of what happened being bitter or hostile or hating or not loving that person. You see the individual as your friend, as your sister, as your brother. And we've heard individuals like Jim Lawson and Martin Luther King Jr. say over and over again, hate is too heavy a burden to bear. If you start hating people, you have to decide who you're going to hate tomorrow, who you're going to hate next week. Just love everybody. And on one occasion, I heard Dr. King say, just love the hell out of everybody. It's a better way. It's the best way. Along the way, I had what I call an executive session with myself. So I'm not going to hate. I'm not going to become bitter. I'm not going to live a hostile life. I'm going to treat my fellow human being as a human being. So when I was being beaten on the Freedom Ride or in the march, I never hated. I respected the dignity and the worth of that person. Because we all are human, and we must be human toward each other and love each other. You would, as a person, see one hitting you or feeling the blows, and you have what I call an executive session with yourself. And you said to yourself, this cannot be for real. This person doesn't understand. Now, when I was growing up as a child, I fell in love with raising chickens. And I think I saw some of these individuals being chickens, that they had to be treated in a special way. But people don't come into this world hating people and putting people down because of their race or their color or their religion. People are taught to put others down, are taught to like certain people or to hate certain people. And I felt, as Jim Lawson had taught us, to be kind, be forgiving, and love and respect the dignity of your fellow human being. The forces of the civil rights movement help sensitize and educate a nation, even the President of the United States. No president, a governor, could see what was happening and see how people were being treated and continue to look the other way. I remember President Kennedy, along with his brother, the Attorney General Robert Kennedy, saying to us on one occasion, "We now understand." That was the power of the way of peace, the way of love, the power of the forces of nonviolence, to say to elected officials, to say to the larger American community, we can change. We can help create what Dr. King and Jim Lawson call the beloved community. We can help redeem the soul of America and lift America, lift our country, lift our people to higher heights. And that's what the movement did. That's what Jim Lawson and others helped accomplish. Worked with James Belva as part of the Nashville student movement, and later he became a part of Dr. King's organization in working in Birmingham. The Birmingham movement was a mighty movement. It was a unique effort. It was the ministers, the large professional groups, women, but the moment they got the little children, these little kids, these little children involved, teaching them the way of peace, the way of love, the philosophy of nonviolence, and they started leaving school, slipping out of homes and schools to go and participate in the march. And the mistake that the local officials made, the police commissioner, Bull Connor, was to use the fire department to turn fire hoses on little children, to have dogs snapping the children. It sort of stirred up everything in the African American community, but a large segment of the white community, not only in Birmingham, but around the nation. You had to be moved. You couldn't stay silent. It was a test for the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. To watch television and see Bull Connor use fire hoses to pick little kids up, knock them up against trees. And you saw young children and young adults trying to hold on to trees to not be knocked down. You know, the city of Birmingham was referred to or called by people in the movement Birmingham. There have been so many bombings of homes or churches. And they came on a Sunday morning in 1963, 18 days after the March on Washington, that a church was bombed, but full of girls was killed right after Sunday school. That was a sad and dark hour. I was home in Alabama visiting my family and I got a call saying you must go to Birmingham. I took a bus ride alone. An uncle of mine thought it was too dangerous for me to travel by myself, so he made a decision to have me to go a distance away from my home and board a bus, so maybe people wouldn't recognize me getting on this bus to travel to Birmingham. And it was in Birmingham that I reconnected with a friend and a colleague of mine named Julian Bond. And we stood in front of the church. It was so sad and so dark. And each time I go back there, I would never forget the moment that I stood in front of that church. Never forget attending the funeral of these 4 little girls. But you cannot stop because of the possibility of violence or someone being hurt or killed. You have to keep going to help redeem the soul of America. I think all of those events, the bombings, the beatings, the arrests in Arlington and Freedom Rides, led, and the March on Washington, all led to the passage of a civil rights act. Some people said, wait, we cannot get it done, but we got it done. We got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed and signed into law by President Jonhson. President Jonhson picked up where President Kennedy had left off. And we told President Jonhson that we needed a Voting Rights Act. And he said, I just signed a Civil Rights Act. He said, but if you want it, make me do it. Make me do it. And we decided to go to Selma, Alabama, where we had been working for several years, and go to other parts of the South. In Selma, Alabama, in 1963, 64, and 65, only 2.1% of black of voting age were registered to vote. Black people were asked from time to time to count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, to count the number of jelly beans in a jar. People stood in what I call unmovable lines, and we had to change it. So after a young African-American man had been shot, later he died in Selma, he came from the hometown of Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr., Mrs. Andrew Young, and Mrs. Rath Abernathy. And when he passed in Selma, we came together and said we will march from Selma to Montgomery in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion. And so on Sunday, March 7, 1965, about 600 of us gathered at a little church. We had a prayer in the church. We had a prayer when we got outside of the church. There was only one person standing. There was Andrew Young, who was on Dr. King's staff. He was standing with his hand up. The rest of us on our knees saying a prayer. And when he's finished praying, we lined up in twos and started walking in an orderly, peaceful, non-violent fashion. No one said a word. As we got to the edge of the bridge, crossing the Alabama River, Hosea Williams from Dr. King's organization said to me, John, can you swim? I said, no. What about you, Jose? He said, a little. I said, well, there's a lot of water down there. We cannot jump. We're going forward. So we kept walking. I had a backpack on before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. So in this backpack, I wanted to be prepared. We got arrested and go to jail. I wanted to have something to eat. I had one apple and one orange. I wanted to be able to brush my teeth, so I had a toothbrush and toothpaste. And as we walked closer and closer, getting ready to cross the Edmund Pettis Bridge, a man identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march, would not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your homes or to your church." And Hosea Williams said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And again he said, "Troopers advance." I said, "Major, may I have a word?" He said, "There will be no word." And he said, "Troopers advance again." You saw these men, all white men. You didn't have any African-American state troopers on the force. You saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us. And Hosea Williams said, "John, they're going to gas us." They came with all type of force, beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses. I was the first person to be hit. My feet, my legs went from under me. I was knocked down. I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw death. And I said to myself, I'm going to go down this bridge. But I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. And somehow, in some way, I lived. And apparently a group of young men carried me back across the bridge through the streets of Selma, back to the little church that we've left from. There was hundreds and thousands of people on that side trying to get in, but the church was too small. They asked me to say something, and I remember saying, I don't understand it. How President Jonhson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma to protect people who desires to register to vote. And the next thing I knew, I'd been taken to a little hospital to be treated by a group of nuns. Lyndon Jonhson was a strong leader. He'd been a leader in the Senate, and when he became vice president, he continued to lead. He made a commitment to those of us in the civil rights movement and to people around the nation that he would pick up where President Kennedy left off. And he did. He spoke up for civil rights. He was not ready for another major piece of legislation dealing with civil rights or voting rights to be put on his desk. But he didn't have a choice after Selma. The Congress and the American people demanded action, and he took action. And when that bill came to his desk after Selma, he responded. He was the first American president to use the theme song of the civil rights movement when he spoke to the nation. And he said, and we shall overcome. I was sitting next to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in a home in Selma. And when he said, we shall overcome, I looked at Dr. King, and tears came down his face, and we all cried a little. Did the President of the United States say, and we shall overcome? We knew it was over. We knew we would get a voting rights bill through the Congress. And later, he called out the National Guard, part of the United States military, to protect us on the 50 miles walk from Selma to Montgomery. It was a meeting that President Jonhson was glad and pleased to have with Wallace. I cannot use some of the words that Lyndon Jonhson used, but he said to him, in effect, we too can make history, or we can go in a different direction. And he said, in effect, George Wallace, you listen to me. You can emerge as a leader, or you can be just a footnote in history. Early during the morning of March 6, 1965, and I don't know why he did it, he invited only 2 of us to meet with him. James Farmer Acor, who was committed to the way of peace, the way of love, committed to the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, and myself. And we were able to bring an aide with us. And we didn't meet in the Oval Office. We met in a little side room. And President Jonhson just laid back while he talked with us. We listened to him. And he said, I'm going to sign this act. But he said something like this. He said, you got to go back and get people registered and turn out to vote. You got to get them by the balls. And he said something else, and I cannot say it for the camera, I think. But he said, you got to get them by the balls, like a bull is getting on a cow, and get them registered to vote. He was plain and open, and later he had the ceremony for the signing of the bill, and he gave several of us one of the pen that he used to sign the Voting Rights Act. I knew then it was going to be a different day. Because back in 1957, Dr. King had spoken so many times. He would say, give us the ballot. Give us the ballot. And we would do such a thing. Give us the ballot. So we would get in the ballot. All across the South, black men and women could not participate in the democratic process. So that changed everything forever. I think there were people who completely thought that we had made it, that we had completed the struggle, that the journey was over, and people went in a different direction. Selma was the beginning of a new beginning. There was this stress on race and color. There was some people saying that the movement should be just a movement of color, and that white people should go and work in their own community. I, along with many of the young people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and Dr. King's organization, said we must work together. We come this far together, we must stay together in an integrated fashion. And later, the next year, I was de-elected as the head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and another person was elected by the name of Stoker Carmichael. And I made a decision to leave, and so I left as part of the organization and got an offer to work in New York City, and I went there and lived for a year. But almost every 2 or 3 weekends, I would go back to Georgia, and I kept in contact. Julian Bond, my friend, kept me informed. There are forces today in America trying to divide people along racial lines. There are forces today that are still preaching hate and division. And it makes me sad when you see something like what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. I thought we had come so far and made so much progress. But it took us back to another time and another period. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward and create one community, one America. There's so many forces today that are preaching hate and division. We cannot allow that to happen. There is a great need to believe in something, to have faith, to respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. We were taught during the movement to never, ever give up on your fellow human being. I've seen unbelievable changes, especially in the heart of the Deep South. People are saying things and doing things they probably never really dream of. Black people and white people and others are working and pulling together to get to know George Wallace's daughter. It's been a blessing for me. It may be a blessing for her. This young woman can teach America a lesson, can teach the world a lesson. The past few weeks, months, year, she's been out there pushing and pulling. She was a strong supporter of President Obama. And she tells stories about what her father did and didn't do. And she said, in effect, from time to time, he never talked with me about what he did or what he was doing. He owed it to her. She can be an ambassador for goodwill for America, an ambassador of love, an ambassador bringing people together. I called her a dear friend. She considered me a dear friend. I find hope today among our young people, among our children, among women. I think that's something brewing in America. They're going to bring people closer and closer together. We need leadership now, strong leadership to speak up, to speak out, to lift us, to inspire us, to be guided by better angels. We can do it. We must do it. We cannot afford to go back. We have to go forward as one people, one family, one house. I believe in it. I believe we can do it. We need strong leaders, the children, the women, and hopefully some of the men will help us get there. I really mean that within all of us, there is this spark of the divine that help us, move us, shape us, tell us when to speak up or speak out, or when to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. That this force is part of our DNA. Maybe it's planted by God Almighty. And we have to use it for good to be the best we can be.